Wednesday Season 1 does not get me excited for Season 2, and let me tell you why. It's the characters. Specifically, it's the state we leave these characters in by the end of Season 1. To me, a good season, especially a first season, ends in a way that is satisfying and also leaves enough open-ended to keep me intrigued for what will happen next. I value characters over plot almost every single time, so even if it ends on a cliffhanger, I need to care about the characters in order to come back. And I maybe only care about like 2 characters by the end of Wednesday. And what's so frustrating is that a lot of these characters have pretty nuanced traits, but their concepts either aren't explored that well or they're resolved like 2 scenes later, and it just feels so bland. And this is a show about werewolves, shapeshifters, and a sadistic teenage psychic. Not to mention, the finale makes absolutely no sense, but we'll get to that later. So in this video, I want to do a deep dive into each important character and see what the setup was for each character, what they could have explored more of in Season 1 to make them not be so bland, and what's left to keep us invested for Season 2. But first, I have a couple very quick disclaimers. The most important one is that I don't know that much about the original Addams family and all of its adaptations. I very vaguely remember watching reruns as a kid, but since I didn't remember much of that or much of the characters, I went into this show with no expectations. And so that's what this video is based on. I'm not going to compare the 2022 Wednesday to all of the predecessors. I'm just going to stick to reviewing this show on its own, regardless of the source material. Lastly, given my intro, I probably sound like I hated this show, but the truth is I don't think that this show is that bad. I would say it's average, and I would recommend it for something fun to watch, but it just doesn't get me invested as much as it should, especially for someone who had no expectations. Let's get into it. Wednesday's name comes from the line, "Wednesday's child is full of woe," which is the most depressing line in the Monday's Child nursery rhyme. Woe means great distress or sorrow, but Wednesday prides herself on her lack of sorrow. However, Wednesday's demeanor is definitely cold, distant, and blunt. As much as she rarely cries, she also rarely smiles. She's fascinated by anything macabre, doesn't tolerate meekness, and finds the typical teenage experience to be pathetic. She has a soft goth aesthetic, and this makes her appear odd to the rest of society, but she embraces it. Wednesday is confident, highly logical, doesn't seek the approval of others, and knows exactly who she wants to be, which is an author. Wednesday technically is abnormal though, because she begins experiencing psychic visions, which is a similarity she shares with her mother, but who she refuses to confide in. She finds herself at Nevermore Academy, a school for supernatural outcasts, after a certain piranha incident at her all-American high school. From this, we learn that Wednesday is okay with harming others as a form of justice. In fact, she enjoys it. At Nevermore, Wednesday is defiant and becomes a burden to control for the principal. There are plenty of things that encourage her to escape, whether it's her overly enthusiastic roommates, not wanting to follow her parents' legacy, to despising the feeling of imprisonment. It's only when she learns of the gruesome violence that is occurring that, of course, her interest is piqued and she's motivated to stay to solve the murder mystery. To me, Wednesday is the best character in this show and my favorite character. For the most part, she's probably the least bland out of all of them. I really love her costumes, her hair, her makeup, her iconic dance scene. Jenna Ortega is so good at bringing Wednesday to life. One of my favorite things is her deadpan jump scares, and I do think, like so many have already said, that Jenna as Wednesday is one of the sole reasons why this show works. Without her, I don't think it would be so successful, because she somehow managed to have such a charismatic presence despite having like zero emotions and limited facial expressions, and I don't think it's quite as easy to achieve as she makes it seem. But there are a few major things about her character that I do have a problem with. Mainly, so much of her setup is resolved or close to being resolved by the end of the first season. So let me explain what I mean by that. When we're first introduced to Wednesday, here are the questions we might have for her character. Bear with me because there are a lot of them since she is the main character. The first is, will attending a school of outcasts outcasts help her succeed or be yet another failure? Second, how will the relationship with her roommate play out given that they're polar opposites? Third, will she learn to be vulnerable with her mother? Fourth, can she learn to wield her newfound psychic abilities, and are her visions even reliable? Fifth, can she solve the town's murder mystery? And lastly, should she change who she is? Should she embrace love, friendship, and emotions, or is she okay if she ends up alone? So let's break this down a little bit and see how well each question was answered and which ones weren't, to see what might be left for us to discover in season 2. So for the first question, will attending a school of outcasts help her succeed or be yet another failure? Well, we rarely see Wednesday attend school, and she only agrees to stay so she can uncover the truth behind the murders, which often gets her into trouble. So going to Nevermore does not make Wednesday more obedient. And since Wednesday isn't concerned about fitting in, it doesn't make much difference for her socially now that she's in a school of fellow outcasts who you would think would be more likely to understand her. But she's just too different. And even though it might seem a bit unbelievable given that everyone in this school is so different, I do like that Wednesday is such a misfit that even within a school of misfits, she's still a misfit. And she doesn't care, and I guess that is sort of inspiring, especially for a teenager, when this is usually a time when you really want social validation. There are a few who take an interest in her, but for most of the season, she garners a reputation of crazy antics and accusations, so most avoid her or get angry with her. This is especially true for Bianca, who is the school's queen bee, and who becomes her rival. Although I would say that this is more so in the eyes of Bianca rather than Wednesday. By the finale, Wednesday convinces the other students to help her confront Tyler, including Bianca, though I'm not sure how they so quickly trust her since she's known for being wrong in the past. They do all leave her again though when she brings out her torture devices. Ultimately, she is expelled, though it technically is another failure, another failed school, but she did succeed in killing evil and eventually gaining some trust in her classmates, which is probably more than what she did at her old school. She even thanks Bianca for helping her, and Bianca apologizes for accidentally getting her expelled, though she probably would have been expelled anyway. It's left open-ended with whether she'll come back to Nevermore, but I assume that's what will happen. And then we can look at the relationship with her roommate and how that might play out given that they're so different. One of the only students that does try to accept her is Enid, and I'm actually going to cover their relationship a little bit more in depth in Enid's section, but for now I'll say that they do have a few fights that stem from their differences and how Wednesday treats Enid. They do make up in the end with Enid saving Wednesday's life and Wednesday giving her a hug despite disliking them. So what about her relationship with her mother? Is she going to be able to be vulnerable with her? In the beginning of the season, Wednesday is quite adamant that she does not want to become like her mother. She's disgusted by her parents' PDA, does not want a family or to fall in love, so she goes out of her way as much as possible to avoid her mother and her mother's affection. But after her father is falsely accused of committing a past murder, which, side note, I am not sure why Wednesday was so appalled at this. Wouldn't this be really great? Doesn't she really like murder? But anyway, Wednesday and her mother unite to uncover the truth, and after they find out her father was wrongfully convicted, Wednesday opens up to her mother about her visions. And this is really helpful because her mom gives her advice on how to hone her power, which we'll touch on that in a second, but it's a really sweet moment of reconciliation because she tells Wednesday that she has her own path to blaze and she doesn't expect Wednesday to be like her. In return, Wednesday accepts a sort of variation of PDA in the form of air kisses. I think I would have been okay with this reconciliation if it weren't for so many of her other relationships to also end on a positive note, and this will make a little bit more sense when I get to her last question. Next, we have, can she learn to wield her newfound psychic abilities, and are her visions even reliable? And I think something that confused me about Wednesday's visions is that we're consistently told that they're unreliable and dangerous, and yet I don't think they were ever once wrong. People just refuse to acknowledge her because of their own agendas. At the end of the season, Wednesday still can't control when her visions happen, but we do learn from her mother that visions manifest differently depending on the person. Wednesday is what is called a raven, and so she has a dark worldview and sees darker things, and these are more powerful. To hone this power, psychics are taught by an ancestor from beyond, and in this case, Wednesday's ancestor is Addams. We learn that Goody was very powerful, but her vengeance destroyed her, so Wednesday should be very careful when dealing with her. Goody does help her. She shows her visions of the past and this Crackstone character who wants to eradicate all the outcasts, and this ties back to the case she's solving. But in terms of actual psychic advice, we really only get one piece of advice from Goody, which is the path of the raven is a dark one. If you only focus on the darkness of others, you'll end up alone. But then Goody ceases to exist in order to save Wednesday's life and can't return to train her. And I think this was very odd to do because on one hand, it does raise the stakes for future seasons since Wednesday now has to train herself alone, but on the other, we learn some very interesting things about Goody Addams and then she just doesn't exist anymore. I think it's fine that Goody dies or like leaves Wednesday's mind or whatever before revealing all her knowledge, but I do think the first season is so soon and I don't want them to bring her back because then it just doesn't matter that she left anyway. And sure, Wednesday could learn about her through history books or through her spell book, but they could have just started that way. Why make Goody her teacher in the first place if she was just going to evaporate before really giving her any knowledge? I think it would have been more interesting if we kept Goody as a wise but unreliable teacher. Like in season 2, she could help Wednesday, but you're constantly questioning if it's in good faith. Because from what we see, Goody does not seem ruined by vengeance like Wednesday's mother tells us she was. We see that Goody cared for her mother. She cursed Crackstone, who was a very evil man. She tips Wednesday off about being the key, and in the end saves her life. So Goody seems good. I guess we'll see how they'll handle this in season 2. Maybe Wednesday gets a new ancestor guide, but I just think that Goody had a lot of interesting potential and deserved a little bit more than what we got with her. And then we have, can Wednesday solve the town's murder mystery? And yes, she can. In fact, she solves 2. One being Laurel's whole plot, and the second being her father's false accusation. I'm not going to go through the details of both of these cases, but I do really like that Wednesday isn't just staying because the murders are violent, though she definitely loves that aspect. She stays because her greatest fear is that she'll be responsible for something terrible, which is what was in the premonition drawing that Rowan showed her, so she has to find out more. She has a more personal driving force than just randomly becoming Nancy Drew. Though, again, I also was a bit confused by this because I still don't think it makes that much sense that she would be afraid of doing something so terrible. Wouldn't that be something she would be really excited that she was involved in? I mean, this is a girl who let piranhas into our high school swimming pool. And something that I would have normally disliked about Wednesday is how coincidentally good she is at everything. She's intelligent, musical, stealthy, she's good at archery, self-defense, picking locks, and fencing. But I think it works because she has such an obvious weakness, which is her lack of regard for others. And this leads to substantial consequences. So that weakness balances out all the other areas which she really excels in. We'll get into the finale at the end because I definitely have some problems with it, but overall, I did enjoy this mystery plot with Wednesday. I do think it would be fun to see what other mysteries Wednesday gets involved with, as long as it doesn't overshadow her growth as a character, because I think Wednesday as a person is far more interesting than whatever thing she is solving. And this leads to the last question, which is, should Wednesday change who she is? Should she be a more emotional person? Is this something she needs to learn? Which I think is what they're pushing, because if she doesn't do this, she's going to end up alone. Wednesday believes that doing terrible things for the greater good, like what the principal and the mayor do, is wrong. And yet, this is exactly what she does. First, when she avenges her brother with piranhas, and second, when she uses people to further her own investigation and doesn't consider how this might affect others. While these things might not be as drastic as covering up a murder, it's still the same concept. And people do get mad at her. Enid feels like she's not empathetic enough, Thing doesn't feel respected, and Xavier feels deeply hurt. Wednesday is so determined to not end up like her mother and father that she avoids love, family, and commitment to people. She avoids crying because she learned from her childhood that tears don't fix anything. Later we see she does have her own version of making amends, and while it might miss the point sometimes and may not be deeply vulnerable, she does try. When Thing is stabbed, she gets emotional. It's the only time we see her cry. She visits Eugene at the hospital and brings him honey. She feels responsible for what happened to him. And we also know from her bonding moment with Bianca that she wishes she cared a little bit more about what others thought of her. So she's not completely heartless, she's just very problem focused. But I do think this is where her character gets a little confusing, because is the point of Wednesday that she has to learn to be empathetic and embrace different types of love, or that she should just be herself? Because in the latter case, it would lead to her being alone. But maybe she is okay with that. Maybe that is something a girl like Wednesday would really enjoy. I think that because she's so adamantly against love and out for herself, this would be a very big unlearning for Wednesday to overcome or to not overcome. And in the first season, we see her well on her way to doing almost a complete 180, which if this is the route we're gonna go down, I think it's too soon. We see that she gains the trust of other students, including her rival. She befriends her hyper roommate against the odds. She's vulnerable with her mother. We see her cry, be open to love, give hugs, apologize, and thank people. I guess the point of Wednesday is that she should be herself and continue to be confident, but to not let that cloud how she treats others. Looking to next seasons, I think her overall question would be, will Wednesday have the same downfall as her ancestor Goody, which apparently she's had, although we don't really see what that is, or will she avoid the lonely power she's so strongly called to? And specifically for season 2, the outstanding questions we have are, will she be accepted back into Nevermore? Which the answer is probably yes. What does her stalker want? And can she learn to better control her psychic abilities without a teacher? So as it stands right now, yes, she is expelled with a possible stalker and she has to learn more about her powers. So there are definitely loose ends, but she's already well on her way to learning her lesson of treating people a bit more kindly and putting others before herself. I do think she has a long way to go. She's not completely there yet. She's still quite emotionless, but I do think to add to that, they should have still had some people mad at her by the end of the season, or have Wednesday still needing to make amends with someone, so that some relationship conflicts were still unresolved, since I think those relate the most to her overall points as a character. Tyler is the son of the town's sheriff and a barista at the local coffee shop. After Wednesday fixes his espresso machine, he takes an interest in her and agrees to help her escape Nevermore. Of course, this doesn't end up happening, but we do learn that Tyler wishes he could escape the town too. We're made to believe that Tyler is genuinely interested in Wednesday. He's excited to take her to the Raven, organizes a lavish date, and helps her with her investigation, including giving her the file for an old murder case in which her father is the prime suspect. Tyler also has a strained relationship with his father because his dad doesn't want to discuss his late mother, and this leads Tyler to resent his father for being closed off and avoidant. Now, I didn't know how Tyler would fit into this whole murder mystery, but I will tell you, I did not like him, and that continued for most of the season. All I know about this boy is that he makes coffee, he likes Wednesday, and he hates his dad. So he is very bland for 90% of this show. And so when we're introduced to Tyler, what would be the questions we have for him? Well, the first is, will he and Wednesday form a relationship? Then, will his relationship with his dad get better? And lastly, is he hiding anything? And let's just get that one out of the way first, because yes, he is. The first thing we learn that he's hiding is that Tyler and his friends assaulted Xavier in the past because Xavier was an outcast. And this is the first hint that Tyler might not be as good as he says he is, though he does make us believe he's sorry for what he's done. The second and most important thing is that Tyler is no normie. He was the monster all along. Tyler is a Hyde, which is a trait he inherited from his mother, and Hydes must have a master, and Tyler's master is Miss Thornhill, aka Laurel Gates, and she took advantage of his grief and lack of a mother figure to gain his trust. And this is honestly quite tragic and very sad, but in his reveal speech to Wednesday, it seems that he genuinely enjoyed the violence he caused and is actually bloodthirsty, so I don't feel too bad for him. And this is really the only interesting thing about Tyler, which is his trauma that he clearly needs to work through, but instead it was used against him. I do think him being the monster was a fine reveal, except for what it means for him and Wednesday's relationship. So will he and Wednesday get together? And this sort of happens. They do have a cute date night and they kiss, but this makes Wednesday realize who he is and their relationship ends. But here's the thing with Tyler. I never understood why Tyler likes Wednesday, especially with how often Wednesday does not reciprocate his advances and plainly takes advantage of him for her own purposes. It just isn't believable that he would be so head over heels for her. Sure, sometimes we can all be a bit delusional when we have crushes, but I think this one's just really reaching.
Call me crazy, Wednesday, but you keep giving me these signals.
It's not my fault I can't interpret your emotional Morse code.
Then let me spell it out. I thought we liked each other.
Of course, we can rewatch this knowing that Tyler's feelings are a complete act and that the only reason he didn't kill her was not because he liked her, but because Thornhill needed her alive. But let's just think about this plan for a second. They only need Wednesday to stay in town, to stay alive, and to have some semblance of trust. So it doesn't really make any sense why he would have to woo Wednesday to keep her in town. She's already going to stay for the case, which Tyler knows that she's interested in. Maybe he's trying to use romance as a way to distract her from solving the case, but he doesn't really try that hard to stop her from looking into it, except maybe for running her out of the Gates mansion. He really only needed to befriend her, and if you want to have this romance for the story, at least make him interesting, while also not making him seem suspicious, and Xavier is slightly better with this. I also feel that where Wednesday is as a character, she isn't really ready to have a romance. She's so against love right now. So I don't know why they decided to put two love interests in here for her. I think you could easily make the argument that Wednesday doesn't need a love interest. You could also make the argument that she could need a love interest to get her to explore a different kind of emotion or something like that. But it has to make sense that they would be interested in one another. As much as I can't see what Tyler would see in Wednesday, I also don't know what Wednesday would see in Tyler. Lastly, we have, will Tyler's relationship with his dad get better? We are introduced to the idea that there is tension in the house, but they don't reconcile this by the end of the season. His father does condemn him from seeing Wednesday, and we learn why that is later, which is that his dad is suspecting that Tyler is the Hyde. So at the end of the season, do we care about Tyler? And to me, he is so boring. The only interesting thing that we learn about Tyler is the reveal at the end and how this whole thing happened. But to be fair, there is opportunity to make him more interesting in season 2. For example, will his relationship with his dad get better? This is something we could revisit in another season, whether their relationship doesn't get better and this fully becomes his demise, or if they are able to mend their relationship and Tyler is able to become a better person. And then we have, will he escape and continue to fulfill Thornhill/Laurel's mission? He does seem to be well on his way to the full-on dark side, and we do see him attempt to break out of his chains, but I don't really care about this cliffhanger. We already know who the monster is and what his mission is. We'd only be trying to stop him again and with no mystery. Plus, we have the setup for a stalker, and regardless if it's Laurel or someone else, that's more of an interesting villain than Tyler again. You could make the argument for a redemption arc, since this all started with his trauma and terrible relationship with his dad and manipulation from Laurel, but because we know he enjoys being evil, I don't even know if that's worth exploring. Maybe it's the monster taking over him in this scene, so there really is a good guy underneath, but we know he assaulted Xavier in the past, so it's quite possible he's just an evil person. And lastly, is his master alive? Probably, but she's also bland, and we'll discuss that in a little bit. Xavier is a boy who draws in a shed and is the second possible love interest for Wednesday. He is the resident tortured artist at Nevermore and apparently has a dark side that not many know about. He has quite terrible communication skills when it comes to crazy accusations from Wednesday, but on the bright side, he does forgive incredibly easily, except if you're his ex and your name is Bianca. Xavier is intrigued by Wednesday when she comes to Nevermore because she's so different. We learn that they actually met several years ago at his godmother's funeral when she inadvertently saved him from being cremated, and now it seems he's developed a crush on her. He's also somewhat psychic, and we get glimpses of his visions through his artwork, which he can also make come alive. And these drawings end up helping Wednesday in her murder mystery, but are also what makes her suspicious of him, so it's a little bit of an unfortunate talent. Now, I really didn't like either of the love interests, but I did like Xavier better than Tyler. I think because he becomes Wednesday's #1 suspect, this made me more curious about him, and Xavier also makes some pretty valid points to Wednesday about how she treats people. And even though this cuts kind of deep, I did respect his honesty. So what do we want to learn about Xavier? Well, we have what's the story with him and his ex Bianca? Will he form a relationship with Wednesday, and is he hiding anything, and if so, what? So what's the story with him and his ex Bianca? We learn that Xavier broke up with her because he suspected she was manipulating him with her siren song. And perhaps this is a valid reason with what we learn later about Bianca's amulet, which is supposed to mute her siren song, but isn't 100% effective. Now he's turned his interest to Wednesday, but Bianca clearly isn't over this and tries to sway him away from her. And this leads to, will he and Wednesday get together? And no, but it's left open-ended by the end of the season. Xavier's first interaction with Wednesday at Nevermore is saving her life, and usually you'd want to repay someone for such a heroic act, but that's not Wednesday's style. Though perhaps it's okay, since Wednesday inadvertently saved his life from being cremated when they were 10. After he rescues her, he tries several times to get to know her better. And I like to think that Xavier finds Wednesday's straightforwardness attractive because this isn't something he could trust with Bianca. And that's what made Xavier a more interesting love interest to me, because I could understand at least one reason why he would like her, which isn't something I could easily do with Tyler. And unlike Tyler, Xavier had a more believable reaction when he realizes Wednesday is playing his emotions to further her investigation, and when she incorrectly accuses him of being the monster and falsely convicts him. He asks her if she even cares about anyone and if she knows who her real friends are. The problem with this, though, is each time Wednesday does something bad to him, he forgives her so quickly. He forgives her for asking him to the dance to cover that she was snooping through his things, for accusing him of being the monster, and for throwing him in jail. At least when he goes to jail, he does go off on her a little bit, but by the next episode, everything is fine. We do get a nice full circle moment when Wednesday saves Xavier's life from Crackstone, so perhaps actions speak louder than words for him. Lastly, we have, is Xavier hiding anything? And Xavier is hiding two things. The first one is something we learned from Ajax, which is that he has a dark side, and we're not really sure what that means yet, so this is left pretty open-ended. The second thing that he is hiding is his artwork. First of the monster, and then a drawing of Wednesday. His drawings keep us guessing with whether he's the monster or not, and honestly, Wednesday is very right to be skeptical. She throws very convincing claims at him. He's always there when the attacks happen, he draws the monster, he knows where the monster lives, maybe he doesn't attack her because he likes her, and instead of explaining himself or his alibi, he jumps straight to being offended, and like, that is so suspicious. Like, you literally painted a picture of the therapist dying. Like, maybe explain yourself. When Wednesday sees his drawing of her, she doesn't really know how to feel about it. In fact, she straight up avoids confronting it and just walks away, which I think is so funny. And we also learn another thing he likes about her, which is her cello music and the way that she doesn't feel so guarded when she plays. I don't even know if Tyler knows she plays the cello. So do we care about Xavier? Are we interested to know what will happen with him in season 2? He really only has 2 questions by the end of the season. The first is, where will his relationship with Wednesday go? So by the end, he and Wednesday reconcile with each other, and consistent with his very over-forgiving nature, he casually buys her a $1,000 iPhone as a parting gift. And this was just such a random thing to have happen, especially especially since Wednesday has said multiple times that she refuses to be a slave to technology. I actually think it would have been a lot sweeter if Xavier had said, hey, since you don't use modern technology, I'll write you letters. Here is the first one to read on the car ride home, and then maybe there would be a second scrap of paper in the envelope in different handwriting or something that says, I'm watching you, with some Polaroids. I think that would be more thoughtful than buying her love. And I also really loved how Wednesday was so against modern technology. It made the way she went about things very unique. And this just looks like we're going to get another Pretty Little Liars reboot with a new A in town. The second outstanding question we'd have for Tyler is, what is his family history? We learn his family never showed up for Parents Week, so what's the story there? We know his dad is a famous psychic, but is there something else he's hiding? Is this what his dark side is? And that's maybe the most interesting thing about Xavier that we have yet to learn about, but it was such a minor thing in the show that it doesn't really matter that much. And I still stand by the fact that his communication skills are lacking and he forgives things too conveniently. To me, Xavier is better than Tyler, but I'm also not dying to know more about him. Unlike this next character, who I think deserved way more screen time. Bianca is the queen bee of Nevermore. As a siren, her voice is her power and allows her to manipulate others to do her bidding, although the amulet she wears dampens her effectiveness. Bianca enjoys her high social status and will do whatever it takes to defend it. Wednesday becomes her #1 threat when Bianca realizes she matches her skill in several areas. This rivalry is heightened when Xavier, Bianca's ex, becomes interested in Wednesday. It's just another thing that Wednesday could take away from her. We all know he broke up with Bianca because he believes she wrongly influenced his feelings with her siren song, but Bianca denies this and continues to pursue him in the hopes that they'll get back together. Bianca is willing to cheat to win, is ruthless, prone to jealousy, and not afraid of a challenge. She is also highly strategic and holds a certain degree of power over students as the leader of the school's secret society, the Nightshades. I think Bianca is a great character because there is so much more than meets the eye with her. I absolutely think she deserved more screen time because we get some really interesting answers to the questions we might have for her. The first being what happened between Bianca and Xavier, which we've already discussed. The second, how will the rivalry between Bianca and Wednesday play out? And lastly, is there more to her than the typical mean girl facade? So how will the rivalry between Bianca and Wednesday play out? Will her and Wednesday have a back and forth? She beats Wednesday at fencing, then Wednesday shows her up in herbology or botany or whatever this class is. Bianca tries to throw the poke up, but Wednesday's team wins. It isn't until Wednesday offends Xavier that Bianca sort of wins him back. And it's in the Raven episode that we see the first little bit of humanity in Bianca, because even after going to the dance with Xavier, she hasn't truly won. He's still thinking about Wednesday. When he asks Bianca to erase his memories of Wednesday, Bianca is offended and refuses. The very thing he broke up with her for is now what he wants her to do to him. Bianca and Wednesday then have a little bonding moment since they're both going through some boy troubles, and we'll touch on this moment in a second. But with this new understanding of each other, Bianca helps Wednesday in her investigation, then helps confront Tyler, and finally stabbing Crackstone and saving Wednesday so she can deliver the final blow. By the end, Wednesday and Bianca are less hostile towards each other. Bianca even apologizes about getting her expelled, so the animosity that was there in the beginning has faded. So then we have, is there more to her than the typical mean girl facade? And the answer is yes. In her moments of vulnerability with Wednesday, we learn a devastating truth. Bianca can never know if someone loves her or if it's the influence of her siren song. Her amulet isn't foolproof. And what's even more sad is that she can't even trust her own emotions. I think this is such a tragic concept. The struggle to know if others' emotions for you are authentic, plus the awareness that you can't even trust yourself is such a heavy burden. I think her character has a lot of potential, which I know we can discuss more in season 2, but I would have swapped out every single Enid and Ajax scene for Bianca. What also makes Bianca so interesting is how contradictory she is. She so desperately wants others to trust her sincerity, and yet her identity is almost entirely fabricated. When her mother comes to visit, we learn that her actual name is Brandy Jane, and that she grew up in a cult that scammed people under the guise of a self-help app. She escaped, created a new name for herself, and sirened her way into Nevermore. Bianca seems tough, but she's incredibly insecure and afraid of losing what she's built. Her mom knows this and blackmails her for help back at the cult by threatening to reveal the truth, and Bianca has to agree. But we still see that Bianca actively disagrees with her mother when she convinces Lucas, a normie and the mayor's son, to quit the self-help app. By the way, this relationship comes out of nowhere because I genuinely thought Lucas was starting to like Enid, but okay. With Bianca, we learn a lot of interesting things about her, but there are also a lot of questions left to be answered about her. For example, how will she cope with her siren powers? Will she be able to gain the trust of others and trust herself? What does it mean for Bianca to help her mother? What kinds of evil or bad deeds will she get herself into? Will people find out she used her siren song to be admitted into Nevermore? And lastly, will her and Wednesday continue to build their relationship, or will they remain neutral? And so to me, Bianca is a great example of having some moments of growth while also keeping me interested for what else her story entails. She's helped her rival Wednesday defeat Crackstone, but is essentially living a double life that has come back to haunt her. She's really one of the only other characters that I'd actually be interested to learn more about. Before we go on to the next character, one aspect that I think was not done very well has less to do with her story and has to do with her costuming and her makeup. I'm not sure why they gave the Queen Bee of Nevermore the same track pants and bomber jackets every time we don't see her in her uniform. And I'm not saying that I think she should have been a full-on fashion queen, but give her a more distinct style. I would have loved to have seen her have her own visual identity like Wednesday or Enid had. Even if it is track pants and bomber jackets, at least give her different ones. And I know they're teenagers, and maybe it's because she ran away from home and doesn't have a full closet, but I can suspend my disbelief that she wouldn't siren her way into the mall and get some different pieces. And for her makeup, I really loved her makeup at the Poke Cup and the Raven. I think it would have been so cool to have kept that creative aesthetic but tone it down for her everyday life. I definitely don't need like Euphoria level craziness, but if she doesn't have many outfits, maybe she could express herself through makeup. Just something that would have made her more unique or stand out visually. I think that would have been great to see, especially since she's considered to be the leader of the school. I will say though that I did love her consistently glossed lips. I thought that looked really great. Also, I really don't like these contacts. I would be completely okay if she miraculously just didn't have them next season. I just think they look so unnatural, and she doesn't need them to look like a siren. Enid is Wednesday's overly peppy roommate who is struggling with being a late bloomer werewolf because she hasn't transitioned yet. If she never does, it could lead to social and familial isolation. She is an extreme contrast to Wednesday's gloomy nature. She likes rainbows and gossip and plushies. She is expressive and vulnerable with her emotions. While her passionate disposition can manifest as violent rage, fierce competitiveness, and a strong fighting spirit, she is also supportive, friendly, and optimistic. Despite their obvious differences, Enid is welcoming and warm towards someone who is different than her. Wednesday, though, doesn't reciprocate, and the two have moments of tension over the season. Enid also has a blog that is the school's source for gossip, and you would think this would be quite useful, but I actually forgot this was supposed to be a trait of hers for most of the show. Enid's blogging really only serves as a way for Wednesday to get information about others. We learn that she has a judgmental mother who is disappointed that she hasn't wolfed out yet, and this takes a toll on her, especially when conversion camp is offered as a solution. Lastly, Enid likes Ajax, a so-called stoner, which is code for a Gorgon or someone with Medusa-like powers. Enid is probably my least favorite character. But I really didn't care that much about her, and I definitely did not care about her and Ajax. And this is because of a couple of things. The first is Enid has probably some of the worst dialogue out of everyone. They really tried to make her seem hip and savvy, but it just makes her feel cringy. She says things like obvi and 100 and you have to get on instant Snapchat and TikTok. And you just know that they didn't run this script by actual teenagers. I also learned that Jenna Ortega significantly changed her lines for Wednesday from what was in the script, and I think that's probably why there was such a big discrepancy with the writing quality for Enid and the writing quality for Wednesday, because I think Wednesday has some pretty funny one-liners and has like a pretty good dialogue, but I can't really say the same for Enid. And I think the other thing is that there is something about her delivery that just feels a little bit forced, and I think it's just the way the actress portrays her sometimes, but it's not all of the time. It's just every once in a while I get a little hint of it. And also for Enid, a lot of the questions that we would have for her are actually fully resolved by the end of the season. And I think this is the biggest problem with her character. So what would those questions be? First, how will the relationship with Wednesday play out given that they're polar opposites? Will she ever wolf out? Will she find or does she need her mother's acceptance as a late bloomer? And lastly, there's probably something about Ajax, but I honestly think they were such a bland couple that I'm not even gonna be covering their relationship. They do have some miscommunication and it's the whole reason they're not together. So let's look at the relationship with Enid and Wednesday and how that whole thing played out. I personally really love the idea of a sunny roommate versus a gloomy one. The unlikely friends trope is such a fun one, especially when one friend is annoyingly enthusiastic and the other is serious and pessimistic. Wednesday and Enid have fights throughout the season, but they do become close by the end. I do like how both Enid and Wednesday think each other are equally weird, and because they are so different, they both can learn from each other. You see this play out when they're fighting, and Enid mentions that she writes posts about her real life in her own voice, and her authenticity is what her followers love. Wednesday, on the other hand, writes fiction in a sadistic voice that scares publishers away. But Enid mostly writes about gossip, which can be harmful to other people. And since it's for social media, this can lead her to write for the audience's affirmation rather than for herself. So Enid can learn from Wednesday to care less about what others think, and Wednesday can learn to have more empathy for others. This is especially true because of how often Wednesday uses Enid, and the final straw for Enid is when she's tricked into exploring the Gates Manor and they're almost killed. Enid leaves feeling betrayed, which I totally understand, but here is the thing. She comes back fairly quickly, and it's not because Wednesday apologizes or because Enid was wrong, which she wasn't, but because they both work as friends. And sure, like I can see how they might become opposite best friends, but Wednesday has treated her poorly throughout the whole show. Even hooking her up with Ajax or helping win the Poe Cup were for her own selfish reasons. So I'm not sure how Enid comes to this conclusion because we don't see them work together that much. Enid sure tries. She knits her a snood, does a whole thing for her birthday, but Wednesday hasn't learned enough about friendship to be a good friend. Thing is a better friend. And with Enid being so passionate, I think this should have caused a bigger rift between them. Maybe she goes back to Wednesday's room because she feels bad. She is empathetic after all, but is still closed off because she hasn't fully forgiven Wednesday for getting her into a situation where she almost dies, especially after framing it as a girls' night out. They also hug in the end, which is supposed to be a moment of growth because Wednesday doesn't like hugs, but because Enid saved her life, she relents and puts Enid before herself, which I do think is sweet, but similar to Enid coming back too quickly, I also think that this growth is too sudden. Perhaps Wednesday could have squeezed her hand as a sign of appreciation rather than full-on body contact or given her air kisses or something. Enid too should know that Wednesday is uncomfortable with hugging by now, and maybe she should have stopped herself. And then we have the question of, will Enid wolf out? Enid may put up a convincing front for being okay with not wolfing out yet, but it's her greatest fear. For her, not wolfing out carries a grave consequence, which is becoming a lone wolf. She'll be disowned by her family, not have a pack or a mate. She'll end up alone. Lucky for her though, she wolfs out at the right time and she'll never have to deal with this again. I wish she had a mental block to overcome to get there, but it just happens, probably because they needed someone to save Wednesday and Enid was there, so let's just use her. I would have preferred if Enid desperately tried to wolf out to save Wednesday but fails, and Ajax or someone has to come in and try to fight Tyler off, or maybe she only half wolfs out or something. Because then we have the question of, will she find her mother's acceptance as a late bloomer? And now that she's wolfed out, we can assume that she does. Maybe there's still more to uncover between the two of them because her mom is judgmental about other things, but the biggest one was because Enid hadn't wolfed out yet, and now that she has, her mother will be proud of her. Plus, Enid has already stood up to her mother by refusing to go to the conversion camp, which was so weird that that was in there, but okay. So she's already well on her way to either getting her mom's acceptance or feeling secure enough in herself that she doesn't need it. So where do we leave off with Enid? What are the questions that we might have for her for season 2? And there really are no questions, and I think this is a big problem. She's friends with Wednesday, she's dating Ajax, she's wolfed out, and because she's wolfed out, she'll find acceptance with her mother. I think we could have either had Enid and Wednesday not making up in the end, or what I would have preferred, Enid failing to wolf out. Those are two major points for her character, and for me, I want to see the journey of her getting there. I know you can write new conflicts for her, but the end of a season, like I mentioned, should be satisfying and also have something to keep you interested in what will happen next, and that doesn't really happen with Enid. Where it stands now, she'll probably just end up being an enthusiastic sidekick to Wednesday who doesn't have much else going on. As the principal of Nevermore, Larissa Weems' top priority is protecting the school's reputation. Unfortunately for her, Wednesday makes that pretty difficult, and so she's forced to constantly supervise her. Weems believes in pursuing the greater good at all costs. For Weems to protect the school, she conceals several controversies, such as concealing a student's death by using her shape-shifting powers. This is something that Wednesday absolutely disagrees with. Weems would rather forget the past feuds between outcasts and normies in the hopes of paving a new way forward where they can live in harmony. So much so that she's okay with celebrating the lie that Crackstone never did anything to harm outcasts, which we know is not true. I really loved Gwendoline Christie as Principal Weems. I thought she looked so good in all of these outfits. I was obsessed with her 60s inspired look. I just love her. I just think she's so stunning. And so the questions we can ask ourselves with Weems are a bit more philosophical. For example, are her morals right? What are the consequences of forgetting the past? How far is too far, even if it's for the greater good? For example, Weems says that Rowan's death was a blessing because he was going mad anyway. By covering it up, Rowan wouldn't be cast in a bad light, and neither would the school. And since his father agreed to this, where is the harm? But Wednesday accuses Principal Weems of her morals. She's willing to cover up dead bodies for her own gain, which is exactly like the mayor. Since several years ago, the mayor, who was sheriff at the time, covered up Garrett Gates's actual death from nightshade poisoning. Weems believes her actions are worth it because it protects students from harm and the school from controversy. But Wednesday does make a good point that Weems isn't doing enough to protect Eugene, who is a student at Nevermore, so her logic is flawed. Ultimately though, Weems is taken out by Laurel, which surely as the principal, she must be powerful. I definitely expected more of a fight from her. Really the only thing I want to say about Weems is that I think she was taken from us too early, and there have been hints that she might be back for another season, which I would be very excited for because I personally loved her. Because Weems' rivalry with Wednesday is so fun, I would love to know how else they might get on each other's nerves, and perhaps there was more history with her and Morticia to discover since they were classmates classmates, and maybe the next mayor would pose problems for her and lead her to adjust her way of thinking. I do think writing her out too soon is a missed opportunity, but I also don't really like it when they kill characters off and they're not actually dead. But in this case, I could make an exception because I did really love Principal Weems. Miss Thornhill is the first normie teacher at Nevermore, a specialist on plants, and ends up being the mastermind behind the town's murder mystery. Her real name is Laurel Gates, and she is a descendant from Joseph Crackstone, the man who planned to eradicate all outcasts several generations ago. Laurel agrees with this manifesto and is motivated to resurrect Crackstone so he can carry out his mission. And this is why the murders happen, so she can collect all of the items she needs to perform the ritual. She spares Wednesday only because Wednesday is the final key in the spell, since her ancestor, Goody Addams, cursed Crackstone in the first place. Since Laurel is a benign figure for most of the show, the only questions I have for her are related to the finale. And this finale, it does not make much sense. The first thing is, why do we have to resurrect Crackstone? Laurel already knows his manifesto, and it does not require specific knowledge from Crackstone to carry out, or is only something that Crackstone can do. She could easily do it herself. In fact, she's been doing a pretty good job of picking people off, so she could have just continued with that. And the next thing that makes no sense whatsoever is, why is Crackstone a wizard? I thought he wanted to burn Goody because she was a witch. I mean, he should be repulsed at what he's become. He has become the very thing he sought to destroy. Or they could have gone a completely different route and have him be like, oh, now I have magical powers and I've walked in your shoes now, so I was wrong and this is actually quite neat. And he changes his ways or something. That would be very odd, but like, not as odd as him being a sorcerer, but that would tie back to the whole theme of like, oftentimes we are against people who are different than us because we don't understand them, and that leads to us being afraid of them. So for Joe to now have powers, he would be more likely to understand the outcasts, and it could have been a great learning lesson for him there. And something I think that would have made Laurel more interesting is if she was annoyed at having to stoop to the level of using an outcast to eradicate them. She also has to use the supernatural to resurrect Crackstone, and this could make her question if what she is trying to get rid of, is it really worth it? Because isn't the thing she is most against the most helpful thing in her success? And then they have this battle which lasts like 5 seconds, and what kind of climax lasts 5 seconds? I mean, you have a whole school of outcasts. Surely there could have been a cooler fight scene. But anyway, at the end, do we still care about her? So the questions that we might have for her are, is she alive? We don't really know. It's kind of ominous the way she left. Is she Wednesday's stalker? Will she continue to be a force against the outcasts? But to be honest, I'm not really that invested in Laurel. I mean, Crackstone is dead now for good, and clearly she doesn't want to do this on her own, so I'm not sure where we go with her from here. I think in season 2, we can spend some time maybe building out the culture of this school better, like delving into the subgroup politics between the Fangs, Furs, Stoners, and Scales. I'd love to see more of Morticia and Gomez and Pugsley. I think because there are so many interesting characters, it would make a lot more sense to focus on them rather than all of these random mysteries that are happening, although I do think that is a fun secondary plot to have. I would also love to see a little bit of a darker show. I do think it could be fun to go a little bit more sinister. I do think Wednesday should continue to be closed off with at least some friends and family, and that her whole emotional journey is a little bit slower so that we can really get invested in how she changes. We got to figure out what the heck Enid is doing, give Bianca more story and more interesting outfits. Tyler, I don't really care about him. I also don't really care about Ajax or Xavier or Laurel, and I'm still crying for Weems. I feel like this show is pretty divisive, so I'd love to know your thoughts. My next video will probably be on a movie and be maybe positive, since all of my other videos are like super negative. So I guess subscribe if you'd like to see that. I hope you have a great day and an amazing night. Thank you so much for watching.